Hello and welcome to the Marketing Times Analytics podcast. I'm your host, Alex Sofronas, and today I'm on with Ryan Newman. Ryan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I would love to. I am the Associate Director of ABM Operations at a mid to large size company called School Specialty LLC. We're about a $780 million company, roughly 1,200 employees. I've been with the organization for about a year now, but really excited to talk with you a little bit, Alex, and to talk a little marketing operations and marketing analytics with you.
So tell us about how you got to your current role, what your journey was from your early education years.
Yeah, of course. I honestly think that most would consider I've taken a relatively unconventional route to the position I'm in. Believe it or not, I started in sales, which a lot of people do in my earlier tentative years. But around COVID, maybe a little bit before then, I really started to cut my teeth from an analytical standpoint on the sports side. I had worked with an organization called Sports Info Solutions, or SIS. They're now associated with 33rd, the team, and they did some stuff with Football Outsiders and things along those lines. But they were one of the early adopters into football analytics specifically. I honestly fell in love with understanding the game that I loved for so long, but really fell in love with understanding better what wins football games from an objective standpoint. And it got me involved in the analytics side of things, right? In the past 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I've turned that into a somewhat more lucrative activity by using my analytics chops in marketing, specifically in marketing operations. So it's been a bit of a winding road, probably in starting with sales and then moving into marketing, but also with a detour in heading over to the football analytics side of things.
Interesting. What's your experience with marketing operations?
Yeah, it's a great question. School Specialty for 50, 60 years or so has been a catalog-based marketing organization, right? Think of your typical Sears Roebuck, other catalogs from the past that really drove most of their business at a transactional level for one, and a print model for two, right? And School Specialty, up until probably 3 or 4 years ago, if I'm being brutally honest, almost had no digital footprint whatsoever. So coming on to School Specialty specifically, I think is the most interesting because it's such a unique challenge, right? I know a lot of organizations have probably been through this already to some degree or another, but we're coming into a situation where we don't even have a lead program at all. We don't have a lead engine whatsoever. When I came in, I found out the only thing that we were doing from a lead standpoint only had to do with our ABM side of things and only had to do with hand raisers, right? We weren't actually finding any of the individuals that might have provided some buying signals or provided some kind of behavior that would indicate to us that they're ready to engage in a conversation with sellers, but just haven't raised their hand yet. QL, i.e. a scoring system, i.e. driving some kind of nurture content marketing to encourage our sellers to actually have conversations with potential buyers that haven't raised their hand. It doesn't even exist. But I think it's been a pretty fascinating challenge because it's one that I really didn't think was going to be a big part of the role, right? Bringing an organization in 2024 into digital marketing maturity has really been top of my list, right? If we're talking from a macro standpoint, really what this job has been focused on, right? What can we do to move from a print and catalog-based organization to a mature digital organization, right? We're talking about, as you can imagine, situations where our cost to acquire a particular individual, when we're talking about print, is anywhere from 6 to 10x what we do on the digital side, right? So it's been a pretty heavy lift, but at the same time, been a very fruitful one, right? And really getting a chance to spend some time with the organization now. I think I just hit my 1 year the other day with the organization has been very fruitful so far, but it's been a great challenge, right? Bringing them into the digital age and trying to come up with something that really moves the needle. Yeah. I think one of the things that we talked about the last time that we chatted was what I think is most exciting, at least in the future, of digital analytics on the marketing side. And that's teasing out some of the correlated variables to the causal variables, right? So taking a step back, the email team in particular actually reports up to me as part of our ABM operational roadmap, if you will. And as part of email, for example, we're doing a lot of A/B testing. We're taking a look at a lot of differences in subject line, simple things like color and some things on the content side. But one of the first questions I'd offer up to our head of email was when we would run these tests, how certain are we on the actual numbers versus having something simply be variance, right? So for example, we have subject line A, we're finding 6 or 7% click-through rate, let's say. Subject line B is giving us 2 or 3% click-through rate. How sure are we that's not just variance or noise or nonsense? How sure are we that subject line A actually caused a behavioral change within our A group relative to our B group, right? I don't necessarily have the answer right now, to be honest with you, Alex, but I think with the power of AI and some of the more generative AI type technology that's coming to the marketing operational standpoint, we're going to start getting closer. But it's something that's been top of mind for me. Sorry, I'll catch my breath for a second. But to me, those are the 2 or 3 things, both from an introductory standpoint, where I see some of the exciting things in terms of digital marketing operations and really where we are right now with School Specialty in particular.
Before we continue, here's a brief word from our sponsor, Alex Sofronas Marketing Services. Want to cut your marketing costs and boost your ROI? I can help. With over 10 years of experience, I use advanced testing and analytics to improve your marketing results. By understanding your audience and using targeted strategies, you'll see more efficient spend and higher returns. Ready for better results? Book a free marketing audit in the description below. And now back to the episode. I'm curious, when you're modernizing your marketing stack and you're bringing in these digital tactics, are you coordinating the catalog campaigns with the digital campaigns, or do you treat them as totally separate marketing tactics? How do you basically approach reaching people who might have gotten a campaign or a catalog campaign versus people who have just received one of the two? How do you think about that? Is there a way to make them work in tandem with one another?
Yeah, it's a great question. And frankly, before we really weren't doing much of that. We had a lot of disparate areas of data, right? Where we had a pretty good idea of what was happening from a high level. And if we took these 5 different buckets and added the 5 buckets up, we'd pretty much understand what our baseline metrics and KPIs were, but they weren't talking to each other. So to your point, we would get data from catalogs, we would get data from any one of our channels, from email to social to what have it, and they weren't speaking to each other. So one of the things we started doing was trying to find a way from and this might sound relatively rudimentary or elementary to some of the listeners out there, but to come up with some kind of taxonomy within our campaign, honestly, our campaign naming hierarchy, right? We weren't utilizing things like a parent campaign with a sibling campaign or even a grandparent campaign to have all that data live under one subsection, right? We were having our QR codes that were coming off of our magazines or catalog, not necessarily speaking to anything, having to use a Looker Studio report to find that number. And then anything that was coming via email or one of our social channels coming from a different place, right? We tried to use some automation tools specifically within Salesforce and Salesforce Marketing Cloud to bring those items together and to actually, again, it might sound silly, but using the power of simple, proper campaign hierarchy, being able to house all that data in one place and have it roll up to one ultimate campaign.
Gotcha. And then how does that inform the actual execution by having that improved taxonomy?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's been honestly our bread and butter. We have been, in my opinion, over the past 6 months, been an organization that have used data to inform direction, decision, and execution moving forward. We want to shy away from making assumptions on certain results or what we interpret as certain results, and we want to lean into more objective data, right? Let me give you an example of that. As I mentioned earlier, we really don't have a true marketing lead engine, right? We've done some throw it against the wall lead campaigns, and we would try to entice some hand raisers, but we weren't getting really good results. The data was coming in disparate places, and there were lots of other opportunities within our market where an individual's not necessarily raising their hand, but they do want to interact with us, and maybe they want to interact with us over time. And we didn't have that nurture program. We didn't really have a lead scoring program. We had nothing to objectively look at the true buyer journey and understand what are the signals that are telling us they're ready to buy, right? That has led us down the lead scoring program, or our loan program, our lead optimization and nurturing engine, as I think we're calling it now. And we've really pushed to, instead of use what I'm sure most of the listeners have used in the past, simple scoring systems through Pardot, where you set up scoring ad hoc, right? Where you make assumptions on the strength of a particular behavior, right? You watch this video, you get 5 points. You open up this email, it's 10 points, and it aggregates up to a point and QL threshold. And at that point, we pass them on to the seller, right? We didn't want to do that, right? Because if you've been in marketing analytics and the marketing operations side of things long enough, you know that a lot of times those behaviors aren't true buying signal, or at least the magnitude of the behaviors don't match real life buying signals. And again, in 2024, leveraging the power of AI, we can look at this data in mass and at scale. And instead of having a human throw an assumption against the wall and assume that this email is 5 points and watching this video is a true buying signal, why don't we tell big data and AI to aggregate all this stuff, correlate it against our KPIs like close won versus close loss and the volume of the close won versus close loss, and run it against those behaviors and get a better picture of what that profile looked like rather than our assumptions. So I know I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think that's one of the exciting things that we're doing, and one of the exciting things that we can do now with the power of AI that we really couldn't have done in the past 3 or 4 or 5 years here.
Yeah, and how similar is that to how MTA works? Is that basically an MTA model?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, actually. To my knowledge, it can actually be used in either last touch, first touch, or multi-touch modeling. We have actually come to the conclusion, and frankly, in my experience in the past 3 or 5 years, to have an agreement across the organization on what model you're going to use before you set off anything. For example, we were just having this conversation with sales, in fact, and trying to come up with a multi-touch model instead of simply using last touch attribution, because unless you're extremely well set up, and if I'm being honest, Alex, much further down in the maturity cycle from a digital marketing standpoint, I don't think you can pull together multi-touch without causing a lot of, let's say, frictions between the sales side of thing and the marketing side of thing. So we have literally gone in and done what we've found marginal success with, and just simply assumed last touch attribution, last campaign that comes through, that's where the attribution is going to go to. That's what we're going to have to point our finger to, because otherwise it gets really murky. Mm-hmm. I know there's some interesting MTAs that are out there. We really haven't dipped our toe in it just yet, outside of using the simple last touch model, at least from a campaign standpoint.
Okay, that makes sense. When thinking about AI and how it can transform the relationship between marketing and sales, you mentioned that qualifying leads through looking at the different behaviors and weighing them appropriately to revenue is a way to understand the value of different kinds of traffic. How else will AI change the relationship between sales and marketing?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. There's almost too many ways to truly be able to understand now. I'm not on this question, if I'm being brutally honest with you, Alex, but I can tell you, at least from my interpretation and the level in which we've deployed AI on the marketing front, what we assume will be at our disposal in even 6 or 12 months will probably be what we had assumed we'd have at our disposal in about 24 months. right? Like the speed at which we're able to do things that we couldn't have even comprehended at this point with the power of AI is almost exponential to a level that we can't comprehend now. So I know that's sidestepping or skirting the question, but it's at least my 2 cents on that side of things. I can see some ways that we can start leveraging some things, at least on a micro scale, right? We use, for example, HighSpot for our sales playbook, right? So ABM owns all of the sales pitches and the distributed marketing approach for our sellers. We work in concert with them. And a lot of the content that is built within those sales playbook has been brought in through some AI automations in understanding what pitches are actually getting some more attention at the buyer level, and much more than we would have expected, and much more than any one individual seller or one individual marketer could have comprehended. So we are leveraging it in that way. But again, somewhat of a sidestep to the question, but I can tell you, I feel like whatever that's going to look like between marketing, sales, and AI in the future is probably going to be tougher than we could possibly comprehend at this moment.
Yeah. And what about within the marketing operations space? Do you think AI will have a significant impact?
Oh God, yeah. In all of the things that we've talked about already, AI is going to touch some aspect of that, right? Again, not to be repetitive on the lead scoring model side, but it's top of mind for me, right? Being able to understand not just the weight of those particular behaviors, but starting to move into intent, right? I know there are some different technologies out there that are trying to provide intent level data on particular leads and contacts and even accounts to some degree before they even hit your funnel. And where is that intent actually existing? And I can absolutely see AI being able to aggregate that kind of data en masse, right? It's almost a near cousin to our lead scoring model and how we're going to leverage it. Because again, I don't think the right way to do it, not in 2024, is to make assumptions on the magnitude of certain behaviors, but to rather have a system build up some data over 6, 12, 18 months. It's only going to get smarter over time and be able to understand what are the true causalities, not just correlations between certain behaviors at scale and what our ultimate outcomes that we're looking for are, right?
Makes sense. I want to move on to asking about another AI question, but around personalization of content and marketing. How do you think AI will impact content personalization in the future?
There's some interesting stuff we're doing now. The send time optimization, I know, is a product of our particular email server. I think it's interesting to a point. I think being able to target an individual at the moment that they're typically opening emails, or this particular profile typically opens emails, there's some value to it. But I also think we're, at least at School Specialty, not there just yet. And I think there's going to be some opportunities in understanding what the true hook is for individual and for particular buyer profiles that we have not gotten to and we make assumptions on that we won't be able to get to until we have the power of artificial intelligence to go through all of that data en masse.
That makes sense. And so when considering implementation, what are some of the important factors to consider when you're implementing AI into your marketing org?
Yeah, it's a good question. Privacy is obviously, I think, going to be top of mind, whether we're talking marketing operations, whether we're talking personalization and implementation of personalization or otherwise. To me, that's been the give and take, right? The more we dive into this, the more we're getting into particular privacy issues, the more we're getting into a post-cookie world, post-can spam world and things like that, where we're going to have to balance the attention that we're earning with the data and understanding on the individual, right? There's the famous story that you probably are familiar with this, and we're going back a little bit, right? I think this was like 10, 15, maybe even 20 years ago, but there's this famous story where Target, which was light years ahead of a lot of the other comparables in their space, right? The Kmart's, Walmart's, whatever it was, that Target, through their customer program and their insight gained from their customer program, actually started sending a young 16, 17, 18-year-old girl some kind of specific advertising for newborn babies or pregnant women. and dad comes into the Target and is yelling and screaming and so pissed off that they would have the gall to send his poor 16, 17, 18-year-old daughter all this pregnancy advertising when she's not pregnant. And then the daughter turns to the dad and tells him that, oh, dad, I'm actually pregnant. That Target actually knew, based on some of these behaviors and based on some of these buying signals and based on their profile and all their data they put together in a pre-AI world, a very important part of this woman's life journey before her dad even knew about it. And I think that's a great example of some of the balance that we have to consider between these things, right? Once we start knowing about our customer base, their buying signals, and some of their behaviors in scale, and knowing about certain profiles, certain segments of our audience, maybe as good as they know themselves, right? There's going to have to be some genuine, compassionate concern over privacy, right? That would probably be the long-winded example I would give with that particular question.
Yeah, that's very interesting. AI is something we have to approach with a lot of caution. When implementing it can get a little bit intrusive.
100%.
So going back to your current role, you're doing a lot of work with marketing technology on the data side. How are you working with analytics?
Yeah, it's a great question. For us, it's been a primary challenge of bringing the disparate areas of data together. For us, as mentioned before, we're an organization that's just transitioned from a print advertising company to a digital company. And with all the other challenges that come with it, we're dealing with a honest to God CDP that is pulling from 5 different silos, right? Whether it's our MDR, which is essentially our main ingestion point for new contacts and new leads, our Salesforce segmentation and our Salesforce marketing cloud, and 2 or 3 other filters that are bringing in lots of data from lots of places and trying to filter it through our actual Salesforce instance to bring a complete profile on each individual. That's step 1 for us and where we're at. We're so young in this process that we're still trying to bring data on John Smith from A, B, C, D, and E before we can ever actually do some kind of behavioral analysis on them, right? We are very much invested in understanding items at scale, percentage-based items, right? Like we're not necessarily an organization that's trying to simply do better than last year, right? We're not trying to do 10% more. We're trying to take a step back and truly understand, not just at the hard cost, but at the soft cost side of things, right? What is our actual cost per lead per channel? What is our actual cost per lead per product line, right? Getting down to the nitty gritty into P&Ls at the narrowest possible segmentation that we can to understand what's really not just revenue generating for us, but what's truly profit generating for us, right? And then knowing that information, being able to double down on the stuff that is actually producing, right, 20, 25% margins in some situations, and being able to cut out the stuff that, if I'm being brutally honest, when organizations take a true look at themselves and truly do a proper P&L, seeing those departments sometimes, but at least certain product lines and certain channels that are not carrying their weight, they're essentially being subsidized by other product lines, other channels, and they're essentially costing us money in the short run and even in the long run as well. So sorry, went on a little bit of a tangent there as well, but that's really our primary focus right now. I think we need to get there before we take any steps further, right? We need to understand truly, what is it we do best? What is it we do best from a profitable standpoint? Segment that out from both your channel, your support, as well as your product line standpoint. Double down on the stuff that is working well, and maybe have some tough conversations on limiting or at least lessening the stuff that isn't doing well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you were starting a business from scratch, how would you approach the marketing tech stack? What would you build first?
That's a great question. I will tell you, and maybe it's the salesman in me, that I am a firm believer in the best way to sell or market a product is to turn the sales process into a buying process. right? So if you're an industry that sells widgets, it's very innate to go through all of the assets, all of the what's good about your widget, right? What stands out about your widget instead of flipping it on its head, and thinking about what are your buyers actually looking for? What is that buyer journey? What does that buyer want? And how do your widgets actually fit in with that, right? I think it was an old Miller Heiman. I always get the name wrong. I apologize. But I remember he put on a seminar way back when, about 15 years ago, and he introduced this idea, right? It's not very groundbreaking per se, but it's turning the selling process into the buying process. You're not thinking through what makes your widget so great. You're thinking through that customer and that individual at the end of the day, right? And being able to truly serve them and understand what their wants, needs, desires are. And maybe your widget doesn't fit into that, and that's fine. But finding those individuals that have buying signals that are telling you that widget is going to make them better off is the way that I approach sales and marketing from a high level. So to directly answer that question, I think we need to understand that customer best. And to be able to understand that customer best from a marketing tech stack standpoint, that would be a proper CRM that is capturing the individual data points that you need to understand your customer throughout their buying journey, right? Understand what kind of levels of nurturing do they need? What kind of patterns and signals will they provide to you to tell you when they're ready to have that conversation? How long is your buying cycle going to be? What is your repeat business going to look like? You need to have a place to start, be it a CDP or be it a CRM, to truly understand what your customer wants and to be able to scale that right across the board, to be able to serve, be able to provide them with what you're trying to do, be it a product or be it a service at its best level. So if you're going, in my opinion, without a CRM or a CDP that properly fits what you're looking to do with your customer at the end of the day, you're pretty much going in without anything, right? What left within the marketing stack is relevant if you don't have a CRM or a CDP that you trust?
That makes a lot of sense. And do you work at all with selling or monetizing that data?
To third party?
Mm-hmm.
Not right now. Because of the industry that we're in and because of, without naming names, how our main competitor operates, I do think there's a natural inclination to assume if we can fail to a certain degree, we can actually turn ourselves into a platform business, right? Where be it data, be it what I like to call, quote unquote, the billboard space, given how Amazon has set up the stage for others that are able to sell at least at the B2C level, right? You want to move into that space, but my focus personally and selfishly has been so much B2B that I'm not certain we're close enough to that point to actually transform ourselves into a platform business, but it is something to say.
Yeah, that's very interesting. What do you expect to happen in the future with regard to the marketing tech stack? How do you think it'll develop in 10 or 20 years?
It's a really interesting question, and maybe not in 10 or 20 years, but I will say in 3 to 5 years, I have a feeling we're going to get much better at understanding intent-based data versus what I like to call after the fact-based data. Again, I know, and I apologize, but my mind is so focused on our lead program per se. And when I think about every data point and every behavior that we are collecting on our customers, everything is after the fact. Everything is based in a place where we're going to make on a line of demarcation that determines the marketing qualification list of a lead, right? And we're going to do that through some kind of point system that aggregates, be it with a AI-based behavioral system, an old school behavioral system, whatever it is, but all of it is after the fact, right? There is intent-based data that I've seen some in the marketing tech space that are getting close. But when you lift up the hood, you realize that, and again, I'm not going to name names or point fingers. When you lift up the hood, you realize that they're not quite there yet. And I think we're going to get there very soon. Again, a lot of this brings together the AI side of things and being able to understand our customer base en masse at a much more efficient level. And I feel like we're going to start moving toward marketing tech that is not looking as much after the fact as it is able to look at intent, right? And being able to target those much higher up in the funnel and much earlier in the buying process than we've been able to do in the past.
Yeah, a little bit Minority Report like.
A little precog. It's funny you say that because in all honesty, that goes to that same Target example that I gave you from before. And that had almost no digital footprint to it whatsoever. I guess it's not fair to say. They had their customer loyalty program or whatever it was, and they had her and her family's receipts, and they probably had a profile of many other individuals there, and they could see the differences in buying this particular product or buying that particular product. But none of that was with AI, and none of it was really done at a very large scale. It was pretty, let's say, quote unquote, lowbrow. And we were able to predict her very behavior before she even knew it, let alone her dad even knew it. That's the stuff that, and again, to your other question that I think came right after this earlier in the conversation, right? It's being able to balance understanding your consumer and being able to provide and serve to a benefit to them without tilting that, not inflection point, but I guess it would be more of a tipping point into the privacy side of things, right? You don't want to be that, back to your analogy, you don't want to be the Tom Cruise in the Minority Report stopping, in exchange for being able to stop murders, which is such a terrible thing. Sure, I think the argument initially goes to that's pretty intrusive, right? Being able to actually go into the conscious mind of individuals, but that's got to be the balance, right?
Yeah. What kinds of data do you think will help businesses predict buyer intent before they interact with the business?
Yeah, the stuff that I've seen so far has really been based in competitor search algorithms, right? And how much our particular potential buyer is actually profiling up against competitors within the space. And to me, that feels a little incomplete. That's not telling the entire picture. But frankly, I think it's going to be stuff that we haven't comprehended yet, right? Maybe I'm thinking too small and I got my head in the weeds, but it's those certain behaviors that we couldn't have imagined would actually align with intent, right? So I guess I could run you through the example. If we are assuming, again, we'll just use the old school model of the lead scoring program, right? Where we're assuming looking at this 5 points, reading that 10 points, obviously filling out a form is 100 points, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we have that set up properly, I think that once we get to a point where we can aggregate behavior points before that, what were the individual actions taken 3-4 steps before that, right? Even if we have to pull in some disparate places of data, even if it's not within our own system, the obvious answer is going towards search and things like that, right? Where have they been? What have they been looking into at that point? That there might be spots that happened before that we didn't even think of, right? Maybe before they actually purchased our particular product, after they hit the 500 point threshold, after they did these so many actions that aggregated to 500 points. What is the thing that happened before that we didn't even comprehend that could have been a signal to us? And that thing, again, to me, is going to be something we're not going to be able to find out or determine without the power of AI to some point, without the power of being able to look at a very large set of data to understand that it's almost a derivative behavior, right? Or like a subverted derivative behavior that'll come before close one, talk to a seller, whatever your buying process is, 500 points to hit the threshold, ingest it into your system, right? What happened before that might be able to tell us a little bit more about intent?
Yeah, so it's like in the pregnancy example, it might be looking up a symptom of pregnancy without even realizing that it's a symptom. And that could be something that has a high likelihood of correlating with pregnancy. And then without even understanding that, the model can pick it up and understand that data point correlates with somebody being a good buyer of that category of products and puts them in the audience. And we wouldn't even realize it unless we're looking at the actual variables that are being introduced into the models. Is that your understanding as well?
So well said. I believe it was something about when you're 2-month pregnant or something, you start, your skin is a little bit tighter, whatever it is, you're more likely to buy moisturizer, and there's something else with a certain vitamin. Maybe you don't have enough niacin, but that was what it was. That they understood if you're buying these 3 or 4 products, there's like an 80% likelihood you're going to be in the newborn baby market in the next 9 months or whatever it is. And then if you do this next particular action, it's 95% accurate or whatever it was. So it's absolutely what you said, 100%.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you think that like regulation will come in the way of this sort of idealized data prediction technology, or do you think that it will exist?
I think we're seeing it already to a degree, aren't we? If we looked at what happened in the United Kingdom, how much stricter their laws are when it comes to cookies and tracking and things along those lines, even in our backyard. The Canada laws are even stricter, right? We found this out kind of the hard way with our trade shows. We had a certain system for ingesting leads from trade shows in the US, which is relatively rudimentary, at least from a privacy standpoint. In Canada, we have to have a not implied consent, but a direct consent. Otherwise, we're only allowed to follow up with that individual one time right after the trade show.
Yeah. Last question, I'm curious, where do you learn about analytics and marketing tech and all of that? Do you have any books you recommend or any people you follow online?
Yeah, actually, there's plenty of books out there, and I've gone to the gamut, I'm sure. But honestly, in my opinion, there's some larger picture macro stuff you can learn on books for sure. You can learn through different books and things online for sure. Where I found the most value is with my peers, right? With other marketing operational stars. We would use lean data back at my old company for routing and some attribution, right? And the lean data folks, who I'm a big fan of, by the way, led me to a Slack group, a little bit more low tech than you would have expected, but a Slack group of quote unquote operational stars. I think you might have to be invited in there and whatnot, but either way, it was a great way for me to ask those individual questions on a peer-to-peer level and get great answers and true real-life anecdotes back, not just from authors in books or authors online, but really from your peers that are this invested and the crazy people like myself that love marketing operations and want to do it better. Those kind of groups, I think, are fantastic, right? You can find them on Slack. You probably find some Facebook groups or LinkedIn groups, but to me, the peers are always going to be higher up on the list than authors or any individual book that I could recommend.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. So definitely look into your network and go on LinkedIn, add other people in the network, and that's a good way to learn.
100%. You could start your own. The one that I've had a lot of success in is the Ops Stars. I literally take it Ops Stars at Slack if you wanted to join. They've been fantastic, and they've actually helped me, and I've been able to return the favor with a few other younger marketing operational professionals. I think it's a great group.
I think that's a great point to end on, and I want to thank you, Ryan, for joining and for sharing your wisdom.
I really appreciate it. Alex, I had a great time.
Thanks, everyone, for listening.